are you all today? Welcome to Healing on the Mat. My name is Nicole Yvonne, and this is your brief lesson before we get into our yoga practice today. So a lot of times I jump straight into the yoga practice, but sometimes, as I've done in the past, I like to give my students something to think about, because when I teach yoga, I never want anybody to have an empty mind. I want them to have a very sound mind. And when we go over books and when we go over material about knowledge and growth, yoga is a great practice for you to be able to digest it, take it all in, and understand how it applies to you. And I have been reading this book called Her Rites. This is my second time reading it because this weekend I had my first major book club with a bunch of women who came together for us to go over this book. And if you don't know much about this book, the author is Christy Angel Bowman, and she is a trained minister. She has been to school for theology, but she is also a women's counselor. And so she takes practical life and what women have gone through. She understands that the Bible is kind of built on a patriarchal system and not a matriarchal system. And so she helps us to digest as women where God sees us, where the scripture may not show up. And she gives us practical ways to live our fullest life as Christian women. And I like her because she's a wild child, and I'm kind of a wild child. And so where some people may say that she falls short, she doesn't focus on Western civilization and culture. She focuses on culture, period. She focuses on indigenous people and African people, and that some of the ancestral and tribal things that we were, at least as African Americans in the United States, were stripped from. And she brings that into play, still loving the God that we love and serve, Jesus himself, but also understanding that there are some practices we can carry out and it doesn't negate God. It doesn't take away from our relationship with him. And a lot of times it helps to make us fuller people, and it helps us to tap back inside. And so this book is about women finding their birthright, because we don't see that very much in scripture. And this first class that we're going to do in terms of yoga is going to be all about our hips, all about how women birth, all about making sure that our hips are strong and loose and sturdy so that the birthing process can begin. Now, some of this will take us back, if you remember some of those previous lessons, as we go through the chakra system. This will reflect some of that, right? But it also gives you food for thought as you reflect on it. And so this very first chapter is Rite of Birth. And I love it. When I went through the book club, Her Rites, but the very first chapter is Rite of Birth. And when I asked the women when they first got here what chapter stood out the most to them, it was this one. I was shocked. I didn't think it was going to be this one, because this one wasn't the one that stood out the most for me, even the first time that I read it. However, I do understand why it was so profound for them, because many never thought to do the practices that she suggested that you do. And so when we look at birth of right, and this is for men too, right? Men are given a birthright, but in this culture, in this society, many of them don't know what it is, especially if you come from my community or a minority descent. You may not know, and you're having to figure that out for yourself. So when we look at rite of birth, she primarily is speaking to women. So she first tells us to get back to yourself, understand who you are as an individual, because a lot of times we have issues with our mother, and she goes on to mother wounds and toxicity that we can gain from our parents and from our mothers. And as women, we need to learn how to break free, especially as women, but men too, because men can have mother wounds just as well. And so we need to learn how to break free to find our own individual self. There are a lot of things that I felt like no harm or foul toward my mother. She was doing the best that she could. But I felt like sometimes when we bumped heads, it was me trying to break free. It was me trying to find my own lane and not necessarily do things the way that she felt they should be done. Was it problematic sometimes? Maybe, but eventually it led me to being my wholest, fullest, authentic self for me. And at the end of the day, I think that's all she ever wanted. Was it a struggle to get there? Yes. And we all have those issues. But in order to do that, one of the things that she challenges you to do is to go back. And if you can ask these questions, ask them. However, if you cannot ask these questions, there are a couple things that you can do. One, the practice will help you to go inward. Remember, when we go into yoga, we want to make sure that the mind, body, and soul is connecting. And the food for thought that I'm giving you in this video is the food for thought that you want to have when you go into the practice. And so what can start to come up? I've told you before that one of the things that I loved about yoga is that some things started to rise up for me. I didn't know that they were going to rise up. I didn't know that sitting down to stretch and do this practice was going to cause so much to come to the forefront. But when you have a grounds and a basis of what you're focused on, it'll help those things come to the forefront even faster. Another exercise that you can do is mapping the body. So you can get a big piece of paper, you can sit down, or you can even print one online, and you can map out your body. And then you can start to map out the feelings and emotions that you have towards certain parts of your body. But what she challenges you to do as well is to figure out your birth story, meaning not just where were you born, how were you born, what conditions were you born into, what conditions were you created in, were your parents in love, were they in lust, were they young kids, what were they trying to struggle with mentally. I have friends whose parents were very young when they had them, so they were still trying to process. My mother, she was 20 years old, but she still had a lot to process, and sometimes the maturity that we need or that we gain later in life, we don't always have at young ages. I know for my mother, she was just trying to accomplish the job of getting herself back and forth to work safely, making sure that her body was taken care of so that I was safe. And once I was born, it was pretty much just a matter of making sure that I was safe. So she gave me as much emotional support as she could, but at the end of the day, her focus was safety, security, provide. And that was it, you know? But everybody's story is different. So find out yours. Find out if your parents were truly in love. Find out if they were living their wildest, freest life. Find out. And some of those answers may hurt, but at least we get to the answers so that we can deal with them. And we get to the answers. Remember, your heart is an altar. And so even if it's difficult answers, we get to the answers so that we can start to forgive. But understanding who you are starts with understanding how you were created. And these are some practices that I would suggest you do before you sit down to go into the yoga practice. But even if you do it afterwards, these are things that you can have on your mind as we go throughout this routine. And so up next will be Rite of Initiation, which we'll get into that tomorrow, but that will be round 2. And there are six lessons to learn within this book. And so yes, tomorrow will be Rite of Initiation. But as we learn this birth story, remember too that remember that when you learn these lessons, remember, we don't learn in vain. We learn to make things better for ourselves and for the next generation to come. And so if you are not yet a mother, or even if you are a mother and you're starting to learn some of this process, the healthier and wholer that you are, the better you are able to be a healthy and whole parent for your offspring, so that we can prevent some of these things from happening, so that we can be more aware. But also understand that everybody has a story, and that is the fun part of life. Nobody is the same. No story is the same. No path is the same. And sometimes we can get angry about it, but the more we start to face it and honor it and respect it to some degree, even if it's troublesome, we get to live out our whole, full, authentic lives, being exactly as she started out, back to ourselves, understanding who we were created and designed to be, so that as we get into the rest of the book, remember, as we get out of the lower vibrating and as we get into the higher vibrating, we really can transform our lives and be authentically the individual that God created you to be. So get ready to get your mat and get into the floor so that we can take on this practice. But until next time, if you all like what you see, please share it to a friend. Please like, please subscribe, please follow. And until next time, y'all, keep inhaling life, exhaling what no longer serves you. And your girl will see you on the flip side. Love you.